So, it's an important characteristic of all punches to recognize. When we talk about autism, it's not a condition, it's a spectrum, right? Well, punches really kind of are. And particularly, no, it's really the case for all the punches. Because at the end of the day, you could throw a jab like this, you could throw a jab like this, you could throw a straight 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 like this. Notice those are typically defined as all different punches. But if you're not really changing what your feet are doing, this, all kind of the same. That being the case, I prefer to match the form to the function. What does that mean? Well, definitions will vary by region and coach. Definition by objective. What are you trying to achieve? So Benny Urquidez, however you say his last name, is kickboxer, right? Throws a very different uppercut than I do. His uppercut functions more like a straight. It's what I would call a cash register uppercut. Does that mean it's not good? No, that guy was drilling people in the mouth with it faster than they could complain about it. So like his whole thing was to start here and to turn it over like this, using the whip of the thumb to make it fast. And you know what? It functioned like a straight. I would argue it was more of a straight than an uppercut. But given the way that he was using it, that was how he got people's heads to come up. And when their chin came up, he'd hit them with a hook or he'd kick them in the head. And it worked. So I'm not going to criticize it. I don't think it's the most mechanically efficient uppercut per se, but it's a very effective punch. So then what do? Do you call it a straight or do you call it an uppercut? At the end of the day, it's a semantic difference and it doesn't matter. But, and this is kind of a hard stop, but if you're going to examine a thing as a coach, you need to be able to understand what you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it when you're trying to achieve it. And if you don't understand those things, you're going to make a bad coach and you're not going to be able to teach it adequately. So my whole thing is I'd rather have a more strict definition based off of the objective and tie the closest physical application to that objective. Does that make sense? All right. All right, so we're going to go over straight punches and some variations of them. So people often make the mistake of thinking there's only one way to skin the cat. Well, it turns out there's arguably an infinite number of ways of doing it. It's just that some of them are good, some of them are stupid, and some of them are kind of nebulously floating in between. So I usually teach one of the harder versions of each punch to master because it'll help you work on good fundamental mechanics and it'll commit those things to memory while you're trying to do the thing. If you could do it the hard way, then it's going to be a lot easier to do some other modification of it. If you practice doing things the right way, even if that right way is the harder way, when it comes to doing something in practical application, i.e. sparring or in a fist fight or in a boxing match, then you're going to be able to do the little bit easier way a little bit easily or a little bit more easily without having to think about it. So, the jab that I am the firmest proponent of is the piston jab, sometimes called the rollout jab. There's a bunch of different names for it. Doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, this is the jab where the elbow stays pinned to the hip, and when you throw the punch, elbow comes straight away, right? And obviously, it's not going to be like this, right? But it's going to be somewhere on the hip. It's going to maintain its downward orientation throughout the punch. And then when you get to the maximum extension, you're going to roll the fist over until it comes flat. And you should feel a little bit of tension in your forearm as you turn over with the wrist. Now, the pros and cons. It's the straightest jab. When the elbow doesn't roll over, it helps the jab go straight. Why is throwing a straight jab useful? All right, so you get more power from the engagement of the tricep. What did you say? Gets there quicker because it's a straight line, right? If you're removing gravity as a factor, a straight line is the fastest way between point A and then from point A to point B and then from point B to point A back, right? So the straightest jab means you're also going to eliminate lateral telegraph. And what people screw up with the jab is they telegraph it by trying to put too much power in it. Instead of using a visually deceptive step to help you augment the power, they try to put extra turn into it. Well, they warp the mechanics of the jab, and what they're actually throwing is a lead cross, and we're going to get into that later. But being straight and using a straight jab where you minimize the lateral telegraph means you're eliminating the factor that the human eye identifies first, right? Your eye will see this before it sees this coming at you, right? You can even tell just by looking at this ruler, which is easier to see. So the more you minimize the lateral telegraph, the better for the punch, especially when the sole purpose of the punch is to be able to land to set up your harder punches. All right, it's easy to modify. If you get tired of throwing it like this, you can let your elbow float a little bit and still throw a generally straight punch. It's going to telegraph more, but you might get a little bit more power out of it because you're going to be able to move better laterally on that jab if you're okay with lateral movement while you're stepping. If you throw the punch while stepping offline, it's okay for the punch to be lateral because you're moving laterally. Does that make sense? Your whole body's going in this direction, so it's less of a telegraph from here and more of a I'm deliberately pulling myself offline. The other thing, it's the fastest to throw a double of. So because each one is individually the fastest path from A to B back to A, you could do it correctly with a double the fastest, right? That seems obvious, but it's not always obvious to people. All right, cons, it is difficult to master. Being able to throw a punch from here and to get this elbow to stay down throughout the whole punch is kind of difficult if you've never done it before. Now, physiologically, some people have different shapes in all this stuff, right? From the lat through the hand that helps to make it easier or makes it harder. When you're training somebody, you have to take that into account. Physiology is always going to be a factor. But if you can master it, it's going to help you throw all of the other types of jabs. We're not going to be able to cover all of them today, but we're going to try to cover 3 of them. All right, it requires a reorientation of the feet. So if you're going to move offline with this straight jab, you're either going to have to account for because it's so precise, because it's going straight. When I double it and I'm on the move, I have to use my feet to reorientate the direction of the punch. If I don't do that, I'm going to wind up punching offline like this. I have to turn because the punch goes so straight. If I'm throwing a punch from out here and I let my elbow come out with technically a lead cross, I can come straight offline, but then throw a punch that's still going to turn out and come onto the center line of the opponent. Does that make sense? So nobody talks about that either. All right. It looks kind of funny. Some people are going to see this jab and be like, that's goofy. I don't want to do that because it looks goofy. That's a stupid reason not to do a thing, especially when it's an effective technique. But you'll see it all over the boxing casual world, right? All these people are like, oh, well, X fighter doesn't throw a punch like that. Astute observation, right? So anyway, this is the one that we normally work on. We're going to go ahead, get on the bag, and I want you to work on these different things, right? So you're going to throw the jab, you're going to take the small step, you're going to keep the elbow pinned, and you're going to rotate when you get to the eclipse of the punch. You get to the maximum position, you're going to turn the fist over using the wrist and the forearm, and then it's going to come right back, right? It's good to practice the double because it's always good to double your jabs. So go ahead and throw double jab. So now we're going to go over the open window jab. Open window jab just kind of looks like this. Now, why is this useful? Because I can see. And if I'm sparring or if I'm boxing, I'm comfortable here, I'm comfortable here, I'm honestly most comfortable here. And that's because I have a good lead hand parry against a straight. And if the opponent stands at a bad angle relative to me, if they don't know they're supposed to match their center line up to mine, if they're staggered like this, like if this was my opponent, that's great because when they try to throw their right hand, I'm here and I can counter to the inside, right? They're just If I'm here and they have a good understanding of center line and they're moving off deliberately but obliquely, I know they're going to try to come around. I can go like this, but I'm immediately going to follow with a 2 while I pull my head off line. It's an immediate, like, situational counter. You should always have what I call contingency punches. Anyway, so while we're here, if I'm here, I can see really well. He has to be all the way off in this direction for me not to be able to see what he's doing. So that's why the open window jab is useful. You can throw it either straight like this, but you're gonna have to do it on an angle to make it go along your center line. If you try to throw from here, you're gonna come off. Now, if they're either a left-handed fighter or a right-handed fighter that likes to move to the right, that could be useful. Another reason why open window jab could be significantly more practically applicable to different circumstances. It's easy to punch on angles, and it's easy to master because there's really no necessary component of keeping the elbow down. You're here, you could just throw the punch however's comfortable. You could throw it as a lead cross, you could turn it over, you could do all those different things. You just have to make sure you're matching what your feet are doing to what your hands are doing appropriately. The cons, there's an opening right up the center. If they know how to manage the center line adequately, you're gonna get hit. So if you have a specific weakness to right hands, don't do that. Number 2, harder to keep straight. You're gonna have to reorient yourself just like you do with the piston jab in order to make it go straight. It's just that even if you throw it like this, you're gonna have to turn in order to be able to get into your opponent's center line. Last, less telegraph. I'm not trying to put any power into it, and I'm probably moving offline in either direction. That means I don't have to worry about getting any body momentum into it. I could just step. Does that make sense? All right, so now we're gonna get on the bag, and if you know other types of jab, you can throw whatever from here. If you don't, try to throw as close to a piston jab with your elbow down from here while stepping offline, and you can try stepping either direction. All right, time. So, some of the things that we noticed. You guys are so thoroughly programmed, you wanted to automatically throw the piston jab, which I actually appreciate that. Good, because you know what? Most fundamentally sound jab. People argue about it, but most of the arguments they have are not very good, or at least they're poorly founded, right? Now, some things that we did just learn, immediate feedback. The first jab when you're doubling should come out on the first step. When you're moving to the right, throw that first jab when the right foot moves, because you're starting out with a wider window. And then kind of tangentially, not very tangentially related to that, the second jab is probably going to be better off as a piston jab, right? Because when you're doing this, you're providing an invitation. In fencing, it's just like when you pull your blade off the center line, right? You're here. Well, the guy's not just going to walk forward onto your tip. So you do an invite. You want them to come in. That's what this is. It's an invitation. And if you're forcing them to come in, they're going to have to come in pretty close to the center line. If you're smart, you'll capitalize on that. Obviously. Okay, so that being the case, if you're providing the invite, if you are going to use a double jab, throw this one and then get the other one closer into the center line so they can't just throw a right hand straight in the box and hit you in the mouth. Make sense? All right. The Mayweather, I call it the ambiguous jab. So Mayweather had extreme precision. As he got older, he made certain changes to his fight approach, as you should when you are evolving through your life and your body makes changes. So as that was happening, he was smart enough to figure out that his lead hook was becoming less powerful. So he started relying more on straight rights and on crosses. What was more impressive than his cross or his straight was his ability to hide it so that he could get his rear shoulder back as far as possible and with that generate the most amount of power as efficiently as possible. And people don't credit him enough for his ability to do that. He would hide it. He would do something like this as a distraction. And because he had superior timing to most other fighters, he would distract them. And then when they weren't paying attention, he would be able to put all of his power efficiently into that right hand that would hit his opponent. And it would hurt them, which is why it was effective. Unfortunately, most commentators don't recognize that sort of thing. So you have to have better footwork to put yourself in a position to be able to facilitate that happening. Unfortunately, most people don't have very good footwork. So anyway, what we're going to work on is the ambiguous jab that he developed later in life. So if you haven't seen it, there's actually a really good video where you just see him. So he typically fought in a Philly shell. So he was here or he was here. Now notice the distinction. Just like the difference between these two jabs. There was one that was closer here. When he went into a defensive posture, another thing that most people didn't catch, he would come into an inside stance, which means his toes would be pointed a little bit more inward towards each other. Why? Because it allowed him to roll like this. And that was all based off of the movement of his back foot. And he was able to very quickly move his foot into a strategic reorientation because he was planning on the next thing that he was going to do. So from this position, he was defensive. And then he would open up, become more offensive. And then when he was ready to attack, he would open up the window. Provides an invite. Now, the smarter thing that he did was from this position, he just threw a jab straight forward. He would change elevation, and that was it. From here, bah, bah, bah. And he could throw it ambiguously. It didn't matter where he threw it, because it was a target, or it was aimed at a target somewhere from here to here that would evoke a reaction. And that's all he was trying to do. If I'm throwing this jab at you, you have to deal with it. Doesn't matter where I throw it. So, that being the case, pro, it eliminates virtually all of the telegraph because you're not aiming it at anything. 2, it can go to the head or the body. However, it can only go to the head or the body very generically. You're not going to be able to pinpoint immediately nose, chin, forehead as easily as you would with this punch. If you're Floyd Mayweather, you have a whole lot of experience. Doesn't matter. That's a thing you don't even have to worry about. It's not even a consideration. But if you're not Floyd Mayweather, that's actually a pretty big consideration. All right. It's mentally efficient. You don't have to think about it. You send it wherever you are, wherever your opponent is, right? And you can send it consistently. It can be a very consistent punch because you just throw it from here. No thought, no other consideration required, right? It just comes out. Now, the cons, less precise. You're not going to be able to hit a pinpoint target because it's not going to aim as visually precisely for you, the thrower. From here to here, there's a lot more variation in structure than there is from here to here. Does that make sense? Okay. So, harder to hit the head in precise locations, hard to modify. If you're in this position, you're going to throw that jab, and you're not going to be able to, like if you try to turn your elbow in to throw it, it's not going to work. You're here, you're going to throw it, and it's because you're using it efficiently as a setup punch. Does that all make sense? Yeah? All right, so you're in this position, and you're just going to throw it from here. I want you to first try throwing it without stepping into it, and then when you get comfortable with that motion, then I want you to try throwing it with a step.
So you're holding, this is not a turning the wrist?
Nope,
You're like this
straight in. Yep. And if you want to put more power in it, you will torque it from here. Because the fact that you're throwing it from here to here and you're minimizing the distance, it happens a lot faster. And if you torque it, there's so little time that it's affected that you're not going to have a huge telegraph, which is another reason why it could be a very hard body shot.
Torquing is good.
Yep. Thank God. All right, so the first straight we're going to talk about is the hardest straight to master but is probably, actually I would argue, definitely the best straight to throw. So, the inside straight, how we throw this punch is we keep our hands close to ourselves and our elbows tucked into the body. We turn the back foot and we keep the arm close to the body through the full extent of the punch. Just like this. I start, it's a foot initiated movement and it comes straight out from my torso along my center line. Just like this. The elbow stays down and the punch comes out as straight as possible. The nice thing about it, the pros, there's zero telegraph from here. I can throw this punch without requiring any type of movement whatsoever besides the initiation from the foot. If I'm already standing in an ablative stance or an oblique stance, I can literally throw it from right here. If I want to add more power to it, I step in, I throw a walk-in two. There's zero telegraphing from the initiation of the punch. It's got deceptively long range. The farther you turn that back foot, the longer you're going to extend the punch. And it's the straightest straight. From right here, I can throw it, it's straight on my center line, and I can bring it straight back to my chin. When you do that, it gives you the fastest A to B, B to A delivery. Now, the cons. It requires a tight guard. You have to be here. If somebody knows how you fight, and they see you go from a more natural guard to this tight guard, they're going to have an idea of what's coming. So you could be strategically telegraphing it. Secondly, it requires good foot position. If you're not in a good foot position because you're moving or you put your feet in a stupid position, you're not going to be able to throw the punch effectively. And lastly, it puts you on center and it requires deliberate head movement. If I throw this straight, my head doesn't come offline. So I either have to move with it to pull my head offline or I have to deliberately throw the punch and then pull my head off. But notice what happens. I either have to sink very deeply on the back foot or my weight's going to cross my center line. If I'm moving, crossing it is okay. But if I'm not, if I'm trying to throw from this position, I'm going to have to sink it and bring this foot underneath me to support my weight. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? No, but you have to take it as a consideration when you're throwing this punch. Does that make sense? All right, so we're going to try it. Try the inside straight. Last one, the hard straight. So this is mostly mechanically the same, which is why I like teaching the inside straight first, because this one's a little bit harder to do. This one's a little bit easier to do, and it is a variation of this. So I can teach this, and you're going to be able to do this. So at the end of the day, the pros. All right, how to throw the punch. It's extremely distracting, I'm sorry. So, with my shoulder in position here, I can sit in my natural guard. It's still foot initiated. It's coming from the foot. But I don't have to keep my hand in here. I can throw it from here, and I have a wider range of movement from side to side, right? That's nice because when I throw this punch, it pulls my head offline. Right? I can still keep my elbow down, throw the punch straight, but my head comes farther offline. It's got very long range, which is also influenced by how much foot rotation I put behind it. Very hard power when it connects, and it produces automatic head movement. The cons, it requires length of shoulder acceleration. So I need to be here, because if I'm standing here, I'm not going to get a lot of power. Now, some people would consider that an automatic telegraph, but you should be throwing punches in combinations. So when I throw my one, I bring my shoulder into position, and then I throw it from here. Does that make sense? All right. Now, it also requires resource commitment. It's going to take a little bit of time to put yourself in the right position, and you're going to have to throw the punch, basically, because it requires rotation. And if you're not willing to commit to it, you're going to miss with it. So you have to practice committing with it. Make sense? All right. Go ahead and give it a shot.